When Joan Crawford passed away in 1977, Hollywood mourned the loss of a legend. She had built her career from nothing, transforming herself into one of the most powerful women in film history. But behind the glamour, behind the carefully polished image, there was another story waiting to be told. In the weeks after her death, when her estate was opened and her will was read, her family and fans were confronted with disturbing discoveries. What they uncovered left not only her children, but the entire industry, shaken in ways that would haunt them for decades, from poverty to power. Joan Crawford's life had never been simple, and perhaps that is why her death would spark such fascination and controversy. Born Lucille Fay Le Sueur on March 23, 1904, though some records say 1905 or 1906, in San Antonio, Texas, she entered a world of hardship. Her father abandoned the family soon after her birth, leaving her mother struggling to raise Joan and her older brother alone. By the time she was 11, she was already working as a laundress, her hands roughened by soap and water, her body carrying burdens no child should bear. At 12, her life changed forever after a failed attempt to jump onto a moving car. She sliced her foot open on glass, the wound so severe that doctors considered amputating her leg. After 3 surgeries, she recovered, but the trauma left her with a deep, lifelong fear of infection. That fear would grow into an obsession with cleanliness that defined her public image and later, the darker side of her private life. Determined to escape poverty, she left school early and threw herself into dance. By the early 1920s, she was performing in Chicago and then New York under the stage name Billy Casson. Talent scouts noticed her striking presence and tireless drive. In 1925, MGM gave her a contract worth $75 a week. The studio also gave her a new identity, Joan Crawford. It was the beginning of her transformation into one of the most bankable stars of the Golden Age. Her ascent was fast and relentless. With Our Dancing Daughters, she embodied the flapper spirit of the jazz age, dancing through scenes until her feet bled, unwilling to stop until every take was perfect. By the early 1930s, she was a household name, rivaling Greta Garbo and Norma Shearer. On screen, she played women who clawed their way from poverty to wealth, stories that mirrored her own climb from laundress to Hollywood royalty. Yet, as much as she thrived in public, Crawford's private world was more fragile, marked by insecurities, broken marriages, and the strict control she placed over her home and family. Stardom, rivalries, and family shadows. By the mid-1930s, Joan Crawford was firmly established as one of MGM's brightest stars. Her roles in films like Grand Hotel and Sadie McKee struck a chord with audiences, especially during the Great Depression. She often portrayed working-class women who rose through grit and determination, a reflection of her own life story, and one that made her an inspiration to countless women facing real hardship. But behind the curtain of success, tensions brewed. Crawford's rivalry with Norma Shearer was infamous. Shearer, married to MGM executive Irving Thalberg, often secured the most prestigious roles. Crawford bitterly remarked, "How can I compete with Norma when she's sleeping with the boss?" Yet, despite this disadvantage, Joan's films frequently outperformed Shearer's at the box office. Another rivalry with Greta Garbo was different. While Garbo represented mystery and aloof elegance, Crawford was relatable, direct, and tireless. Audiences who felt invisible during the Depression saw themselves in Joan Crawford. Her personal life was far less stable. Her first marriage to Douglas Fairbanks Jr. in 1929 ended after 4 years, plagued by infidelity and rejection from his family. A second marriage, to actor Franchot Tone in 1935, brought passion, but also violence and heartbreak, with rumors of abuse and public fights. She married a third time, to actor Philip Terry in 1942, and together they adopted a son, though she later changed his name to Christopher after their divorce. Unable to conceive biological children, Crawford turned to adoption. In 1940, she adopted Christina, her first daughter, through a baby broker since California law forbade single women from adopting. Over the following years, she adopted 3 more children, Christopher and twin girls Kathy and Cindy. Publicly, the image was perfect, a glamorous Hollywood star with a beautiful family. Privately, however, cracks were forming. As the 1930s ended, her career faltered. In 1938, she was labeled box office poison, a term that humiliated even the biggest stars. But Joan refused to surrender. Her determination would lead to a shocking reinvention in the 1940s, one that revived her career but also deepened the contrast between the powerful star the world admired and the troubled woman her children knew behind closed doors. Reinvention, triumph, and decline. In 1943, after nearly 2 decades at MGM, Joan Crawford's career reached a breaking point. Once treated as one of the studio's most valuable stars, she was now offered only weak roles, passed over for parts she desperately wanted. When the lead in Madame Curie went to Greer Garson, Joan decided to walk away. At the age of 37, in a move many thought was career suicide, she paid $100,000 to end her MGM contract. But Crawford's instinct for survival was sharp. Just 2 days later, she signed a lucrative deal with Warner Brothers, earning $500,000 for 3 films, an enormous sum at the time. More importantly, she won the right to approve her scripts, a privilege few actresses enjoyed. For over a year, she refused roles, waiting for the perfect project. That gamble paid off in 1945 with Mildred Pierce. The film was a noir melodrama about a mother who sacrifices everything to provide for her ungrateful daughter. Joan fought fiercely for the part, even submitting to a screen test, a humiliating step for a star of her stature. But she won the role, and with it, redemption. The performance stunned audiences and critics alike, earning her the Academy Award for Best Actress. Though she famously accepted the Oscar from bed, claiming illness, her victory was undeniable. At 40 years old, she was once again a reigning queen of Hollywood. The triumph, however, did not erase her demons. Joan continued to push herself, starring in Humoresque and Possessed, the latter bringing her another Oscar nomination. She mastered roles of women under strain, lonely, obsessive, often self-destructive, characters that mirrored aspects of her own life. In the 1950s, with Sudden Fear, she earned her 3rd nomination, proving she could still command the screen in middle age. But off-screen, her personal world unraveled. She married Alfred Steele, CEO of Pepsi-Cola, in 1955, and after his sudden death in 1959, she threw herself into the company, even serving on its board. Meanwhile, her drinking worsened. Vodka became her morning cocktail, and co-stars whispered about bottles hidden in Pepsi cans. At home, her children later recalled that the more she drank, the more volatile and controlling she became. By the 1960s, her career shifted again. Whatever happened to Baby Jane paired her with bitter rival Bette Davis in a grotesque tale of 2 decaying sisters. The film revived her career, but the feud behind the scenes grew legendary, with accusations of sabotage and cruelty. Joan acted in more horror films, including Strait Jacket and Trog, but by then the power she once wielded had faded. Withdrawn, her health declining, she retired quietly in the mid-1970s. When she died on May 10, 1977, at 73 years old, the public expected a graceful farewell to a Hollywood icon. Instead, what followed would be one of the most shocking estate controversies in film history, the will that shattered illusions. When Joan Crawford's will was read in 1977, it did not reflect the image of the devoted mother she had long presented to the public. Her estate, valued at around $2 million, over $10 million in today's money, was divided in a way that stunned Hollywood. 2 of her 4 adopted children, Kathy and Cindy, were given trust funds of $77,500 each and inherited personal belongings, including the Oscar she won for Mildred Pierce. Charities close to Crawford's heart, like the American Cancer Society and the Muscular Dystrophy Association, also received substantial gifts. But the real shock came in one chilling clause. With the formality of legal language and the sting of a personal attack, the will declared, "It is my intention to make no provision herein for my son, Christopher, or my daughter, Christina, for reasons which are well known to them." It was a public and permanent act of rejection. The decision stunned not only her children, but the entire industry. Christina, the daughter who would later write Mommy Dearest, had been Crawford's public companion for years, often photographed together in what appeared to be a loving bond. Christopher, adopted in 1943, had also grown up in the shadow of Crawford's fame. To see their names struck from the will was more than a financial loss. It was a final act of estrangement. Christina and Christopher wasted little time in contesting the will. They argued that their mother had been mentally unfit when she signed it, citing her years of heavy drinking, erratic moods, and possible coercion by Kathy and her husband. The case dragged through the courts, pulling deeply personal matters into the public eye. Family tensions that Crawford had kept hidden during her lifetime spilled into headlines. In July 1979, after nearly 2 years, the case ended in settlement. Christina and Christopher received $55,000 each, a fraction of the estate. The payout offered some acknowledgement, but no healing. The bitterness lingered, amplified by Christina's memoir, which painted Joan as an abusive and controlling figure. For many, the will had already confirmed what the book alleged. The carefully curated image of Crawford as a perfect mother had been a facade. But the controversies did not end with the distribution of money. As those who managed her possessions began to sort through her home and belongings, they uncovered disturbing and puzzling items that deepened the mystery of who Joan Crawford really was. Secrets behind locked doors. The distribution of Joan Crawford's estate was shocking enough, but the physical discoveries inside her homes added a darker, more unsettling layer to her story. When relatives, staff, and executors began to sift through her belongings, they found things that contradicted the polished image Crawford had projected for decades. One of the most disturbing finds was a collection of doll heads. Some were carefully arranged on shelves, others boxed away without bodies. To outsiders, it looked grotesque, almost sinister. For those who remembered Christina's claims in Mommy Dearest about her mother's obsession with control and perfection, the doll heads became a haunting metaphor. They seemed to symbolize the way Crawford tried to sculpt the people in her life, especially her children, into flawless, silent versions of her own design. There were also the locks. Crawford's apartments and closets were filled with unusual, heavy-duty locks that went far beyond what most homes required. Many closets, even guest rooms, were sealed with bolts and latches. To some, it suggested a woman desperate to hide her possessions or secrets. To others, it echoed Christina's claims that Crawford would confine her children as punishment, keeping them shut away until they obeyed. Evidence in Christopher's former bedroom reinforced this narrative. Deep scratches scarred the inside of the door as if someone had clawed at it trying to get out. Some believed these marks came from Christopher himself, locked inside as a boy. Though skeptics argued the scratches could have been caused by something else, the imagery was chilling, and it aligned too closely with Christina's accounts to ignore. Then came the discovery of a secret safe. Inside were financial records, private letters, and photographs. Among them, according to reports, were images of Crawford in moments far removed from her controlled public persona, compromising, sometimes chaotic, snapshots of a life that clashed with the starched glamour she insisted upon. There were also letters hinting at feuds, scandals, and unspoken conflicts, including unsent notes to Christina that suggested Crawford wrestled with guilt and resentment until the very end. Together, these discoveries painted a picture not of a glamorous legend, but of a woman whose private life was locked away, literally and figuratively. And, as if the will and the possessions were not unsettling enough, the legacy of Crawford's estate soon took an even stranger turn, rumors of hauntings that refused to die. Haunted legacy. After Joan Crawford's death, the mysteries of her estate did not remain confined to legal battles and locked safes. Whispers of paranormal activity soon surrounded the properties she had lived in, especially her famed Brentwood mansion, known as El Jodo. The house had once been a glittering symbol of Hollywood excess, a place where Clark Gable, Marlene Dietrich, and Barbara Stanwyck mingled at elaborate parties. But in the decades after Crawford moved out, its reputation shifted from glamorous to haunted. Stories began in the late 1970s and grew through the 1980s. Families who lived in the house reported eerie occurrences, cold spots, strange noises, and objects moving without explanation. Some described hearing disembodied voices in the night or the sound of a typewriter clicking away in Crawford's old study, long after her death. Most chilling were reports of a woman's ghostly figure drifting across the staircase or appearing in a white gown near the bedroom where Crawford once slept. The nursery, where her adopted children had lived, became a particular focus of fear. Guests claimed they heard faint crying coming from the room, while others felt an overwhelming sadness upon entering. Paranormal investigators who visited in the 1980s concluded that the house held residual energy from the star's volatile relationships with her children. Some even speculated that Crawford's fierce control and obsession with cleanliness left a psychic imprint too strong to fade. The haunting seemed to extend beyond the walls of El Jodo. Items sold at auction carried their own eerie stories. Mirrors and pieces of furniture were said to give off unsettling energy. One buyer claimed to see an unfamiliar woman's reflection staring back at them. For many, it was as if Crawford's presence clung to her possessions, unwilling to release the grip she had held over her world in life. These tales may never be proven, but they speak to the enduring unease surrounding Joan Crawford's legacy. Her will revealed bitterness and rejection. Her belongings suggested secrets and obsessions, and the ghost stories only amplified the sense that she could not rest in peace. Whether or not one believes in the paranormal, Crawford's estate became as infamous as her career, an unsettling reminder that behind Hollywood's brightest lights can lurk shadows that never truly fade. Joan Crawford built her life on discipline, control, and reinvention. But in death, her secrets spilled out in ways she could no longer manage. From the shocking exclusions in her will to the disturbing discoveries in her home, her legacy remains one of Hollywood's most tragic and haunting tales. Do you think Joan Crawford's choices were a reflection of a cruel nature or the scars of a life spent fighting to survive? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories from the hidden side of Hollywood.